how do you know if you have a good product strategy versus you don't?
It sort of revolves around how you think about your assumptions and how aware you are of them, and sort of understanding which portions of what we're doing are short-term versus long-term plays. A good product strategy is one where you really have a good sense of what you know and how important it is and how urgent it is to understand. I actually don't look at strategy so much as a set of solutions. I look at it as a set of problem spaces that we have to get to understand, because that actually gives us a much more durable way of finding solutions that maybe we didn't think of at first. From my perspective, it really is much more of a sort of living, breathing process than anything else.
Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this. So specifically, talk about product management, product, and a little bit about who Sam is. Just maybe start there to frame the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I always struggle with what do I say about myself? But, I've been doing product management in New York, specifically tech companies, since about 2009. I've had the opportunity to work at consumer mobile and SaaS businesses, infrastructure as a service, fintech, and most recently sort of the SMB point of sale space. I was the vice president of product at Clover Networks. I always feel like I have to say it's the point of sale Clover, not the health company. They're both big. They're both important. I consider myself a product leader from the strategy and the team development space in particular. Most recently, I started a product strategy studio, is what we're calling it these days, called Honest. And we focus on bringing, product strategy and growth strategy solutions to businesses, specifically at, the Series A, Series B timeline.
What do you define as product?
That's a great question, which, as we all know, is the answer that you give when you're trying to think of what the answer is going to be. So I think that product is both everything and nothing, in the sense that, we used to talk about organizations as being either product organizations as opposed to not product organizations, service organizations. It's the thing we sell. It's the thing we build. It's the thing that we all know a company about. So from the disciplines perspective, it's not just about product management. It's about the entire life cycle of ideating, thinking about, how a product is going to be constructed and what's the most value, to our customers, thinking about the team structure that's required to actually build that thing, doing the actual building, and then seeing what we've done. So the way that I practice product from the product management perspective is very much on the facilitation end. From a business strategy perspective, what's the most valuable things that we can do for our customers? Who are they? And how are we best going to reach them? I think it's a bit of a cliche at this point to say that no one really knows what product is, or everybody defines it differently. But at least for me, it really sort of centers around that.
I definitely find maybe product management is the more nebulous piece of how do you manage the fulfillment of that product. And then I think the other piece that also comes up too is product has that broader sense of product versus service. But in this day and age, product often means software product. And that kind of distinction and clarity is useful to kind of have that framing there. But talk about what a good product strategy means. Like, how do you know if you have a good product strategy versus you don't?
Yeah, great question. So I think it all sort of revolves around how you think about your assumptions and how aware you are of them. A lot of business schools teach, the Eisenhower matrix of sort of urgent, or urgent, important, important but not urgent, and so on and so forth, and sort of understanding, which portions of what we're doing are short-term versus long-term plays. I think if you expand on that, you actually get into yet another political person's way of thinking. It's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and all of these different things. So a good strategy, a good product strategy is one where you really have a good sense of what you know and how important it is and how urgent it is to understand. So I'll give you an example of that. If I have a SaaS business that is trying to sell, say, a payments product to developers, let's just use Stripe as an example. I think is exactly what I'm talking about. When they started as just sort of an API for payments, their main assumption was developers want to use somebody else's payment solution and we'll pay for it. That's their key assumption, and they had to validate that as quickly as possible. So their product strategy, in terms of de-risking it, really revolved around understanding that piece. So I actually don't look at strategy so much as a set of solutions. I look at it as a set of problem spaces that we have to get to understand, because that actually gives us a much more durable way of finding solutions that maybe we didn't think of at first. Yeah, so I think you can dig into it a bunch of different ways, but at least from my perspective, it really is much more of a sort of living, breathing process than anything else.
I've always made good product management or just building startups in general akin to the scientific method, where at the end of the day, it comes down to a hypothesis that this thing is painful, and it's painful enough that if I build a thing, then that thing will get people to give me money, right? Like that's or some action, their email address, whatever it is. And then you have to go about and test that hypothesis, right? By building a thing and seeing if people support your hypothesis. And most likely it does not. And then
Right.
you kind of come up with a new hypothesis as to, well, if we make the button bigger, or if we send 3 widgets instead of 2, right? Or whatever it is, that you kind of keep iterating on that methodology and that framework to arrive at a better version than what you had previously. But I do agree with you that product is kind of this perpetual cycle of evolving, hypothesis, test, fail, learn, test, hypothesize, test, learn, fail, and you keep doing that.
That's right. And I think too that, I see a lot of product leaders really lean into that hypothesis framework. And it's really important, and I just want to get this on recording as well, that to remember that hypotheses have to be falsifiable. You have to be able to prove it wrong. And so what I actually coach, a lot of the product managers that I work with, is I coach them to actually start with a null hypothesis. You have to prove that we should do anything. You should prove that it's actually valuable to build a thing as opposed to spend our time doing something else.
But give me a for instance or a story about starting with a null hypothesis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working at this company called Drama Fever. They are no longer around. It was a video on demand platform for Korean dramas specifically. And we had this really interesting, observation, which was that we had crazy engagement from all over the world. It's a very addictive product. If you've never had the pleasure, maybe in the show notes we can suggest a couple K dramas. They're something else. But so yeah, I was doing product management for them, and we were trying to find a way to turn engagement into money. Simply subscriptions in particular. Ad-free watching was sort of the name of the game at the time. And we had somebody come to us and say, what if we created this whole social, experience sort of down below the video player? Hulu was, starting to look at comments and ratings and all these different things, user-generated stuff. And we had a team that was really, well suited on the operational side to deal with sort of the issues that come along with UGC, specifically spam and inappropriate content and all of that sort of stuff. So we're like, okay, we're operationally set up for it. There's not that much friction to doing this. And then we sat down and I said, okay, I need somebody to tell me why this is worth doing. And they said, well, if people are more engaging more here, then, we'll just place a bunch of subscription buttons everywhere and it'll work. And these were in the days when Optimizely was actually pretty affordable. I don't know if we keep that in the recording or not. Sorry, guys. Love the product. Can't afford it anymore. But, I said, just put something in that area and see what happens. I want you to prove that we should spend 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is on this what feels like a huge can of worms that we're opening. And sure enough, you start asking people to engage with that content. They love doing that, but it does not change at all the way that they feel like the value is being delivered to them. It is simply value add. And we ended up not doing any of it. That's like a sort of a trivial example, but I've had it crop up many, many different times with potentially $1 billion expenditures on the line. So it's better to measure twice, cut once, and if you can't measure, then you need to assume that there's nothing worth measuring until you find some signal that shows you the other, otherwise.
I think that's, first of all, spot on. I think lots of early entrepreneurs miss that. They kind of go straight to the assumption that this idea that I have, it's going to change the world and it's going to be massively valuable. And it might be something valuable, but you also have to make sure that you can turn it into a business. A startup is not just
Yes.
a product that is useful or valuable, it's also a business. So if you were to kind of take the same framework and apply it to, I've never written a line of code, and it doesn't even have to be software, but I've never taken that first step of validating my just idea. How do you start kind of low tech, low cost experimentation to validate, is this even worth something to measure and iterate on and improve upon?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to some degree, for founders, there is an a priori sort of recognition of this might be a thing. I should just go for it. There's a leap of faith that folks do have to take because you can't find signal from a system that doesn't exist. But once you have your basic sort of hypothesis of let's say um, I'm trying to think of a good example. People want to watch Korean dramas, right? You have that assumption. The simplest way of testing that is not writing any code at all. It's seeing if there's a way of delivering this content in a way that doesn't require you to do anything other than talk to people. And actually, that's what the co-founders of Drama Fever did back in the day. They had, all these. The reason there's Korean drama content on Netflix is because they had early conversations with them to see if there was interest from the U.S. audience. So I always encourage founders at early stages, but also all the way down the line, use all the tools at your disposal. And I think there's this trite or oft repeated truism of product managers need to get out of the building. I always forget who that's attributed to, but there's more to it than just talking to your customers. It's also about talking to the market and understanding sort of how your product works in the real world and whether the thing that you have stuck in your head as like the silver bullet it has any real foundation to it. There are people who are going to be much better about talking about specific types of testing methods, but I think that it's always really important to consider how we can validate things before we get almost anybody else involved. How can we cut down the 100 ideas that come to us to half that, 25, or even down to one before we even bring it to the broader team?
You mentioned product managers getting out of the building to kind of really validate and to winnow down those ideas to something worth pursuing. In order to do that, you have to have product managers in the first place. I talk with a lot of people day in, day out that think about engineers building features which the users can touch, feel, click on, etc. And I don't really understand this product manager thing. So, what are the pros cons of having a product manager versus not having a product manager? At what stage do you think it becomes essential? Is it day 1? Is it day 30? Is it day, series A? Talk about the need of product management.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you're just lobbing a pitch right down the middle here. Let's do this. Um, I think first off, the joke that I always make, and I'll start this as my null hypothesis, is that no one really needs product managers, but you're going to fail without them. Like it's this very interesting, sort of uh, uh, counterintuitive way of thinking about hiring. But I think that before I give an answer to that, I want to talk a little bit about sort of how product management has been and where it's sort of headed. This past 10, 12 years of, sort of cheap money from venture capital and massive growth amongst some of those early sort of Web 2.0 pioneers in social media, like Facebook or Amazon or Google in ad tech. They framed product management very much as sort of the almost babysitters of other teams, where they and sorry, I don't mean that to be derogatory to anyone who is a PM or a program manager at, say, Microsoft or something like that. Like it's a very important role because you're trying to keep all of the context together. But prior to that and now, what we're seeing is that product management is very much refocusing on its business strategy roots. What I'm hearing a lot from venture capitalists in particular is that they don't want their portfolio companies to be hiring as many product people as they used to. And I think there's a really important reason for that. Product managers and project managers are very often confused. And that's because in this world that we're coming from, product managers, for the most part, have been taking strategy, at least at sort of the independent contributor level. They've been taking strategy, turning that into features, and then getting that stuff built. A good project manager can do that just as easily. Where a product manager is most successful is when they can go to the market, they can go to stakeholders, and they can go to customers and ask, you say you need this, or you say this is valuable, why? And answer that why question in a way where design and engineering can come in and say, okay, we understand sort of where in, if you're familiar with the double diamond, sort of framework, the idea of,
No, explain it.
oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Let's back up a second. There's a lot of concepts rolling around here. Let's get the double diamond in. The idea is that you start with a question and you're going to start to diverge on the sorts of problems that you could solve. This is sort of the purview of leadership. It's the purview of early stage companies to sort of figure out where they're best positioned, right? And then we start to converge, which is that second part of that first diamond, on the problem that is sort of our sweet spot. Where do we have an unfair advantage? Where is the sort of product and business nexus really strong? How do we think we can build a team? What domains are we interested in pursuing? What's the cost structure? All those fun things. Then in that second piece, that second diamond is the solution diamond. What types of solutions can we be pursuing? And then which solution is correct? Designers live in double diamond land just all the time. For product folks, it's really important for them to live sort of in the converging on the right problem to solve and helping the team diverge on the types of solutions that they can be using. And then being able to guide those folks towards the correct solution. But at the end of the day, a designer is going to be much better about, understanding exactly what that user journey looks like. And an engineer is going to know what's feasible and the right way to build it. So a product manager needs to be able to step away. Where I see product managers spend a lot of their time these days is very much sort of on that first part of the second diamond, which is how can we make a backlog of this stuff? How can we write stories, user stories around this? Where I think we're going to see more and more push in the next 2 to 3 years is getting strategically minded product managers into that first diamond, where they can be identifying the right problems to solve that the business has yet to really, understand. I've had one advisor call that product managers who can see around corners. They can sort of understand what's coming next without having experienced it themselves.
So when is this necessary for a startup? Startups have very limited resources. They have to pick and choose. There's never enough engineering talent always, right? It's always overly expensive. So why would you pick bringing in a product manager who is thinking more on the strategic side, which one could argue maybe the founders are supposed to do, and allocate precious venture backed or bootstrap dollars towards a product manager?
Yeah, I think I want to reframe the question if that's okay. So I think
By all
the
means.
question that yes, I know we're early in this, but I'm already like digging in there. So the question that I would really be asking is like what is when does the value of the product function become so necessary that we need to sort of fill that externally? And so if we talk a little bit more about the product function rather than product managers as a hire, then we're talking about something that we can either find within the existing team we have, and then maybe somebody needs training, or we're talking about a founder whose time is most effectively applied to that, in which case we may need coaching or mentoring, or they're coming from a product role and they've got it. But there always comes a point for any founding team where it's no longer tenable for them to be spending their time writing user stories. For some founding teams that happens early, for some founding teams that happens very late. And for some founding teams, they never give it up. And maybe, that becomes a real point of friction on their teams. But I think generally it's when the team starts to reach a certain complexity, not necessarily a certain size, but a certain complexity. So when engineers start getting out of sync with, say, design or marketing about what is necessary, when there have to be more than, say, one or two meetings to sort of figure out how the context is shifting, then you start to need to consider, is there somebody that's missing in this that should be owning the context? And it's at that moment when you realize that context is being lost, and that we're all having to do a lot of extra work and keep a lot of cognitive load, in order to just do our jobs day to day, where it can be really helpful to understand, that the opportunity exists to bring in some more expertise on the product function side. And the benefit there is founders have somebody that they can collaborate with within the organization who understands everything that's happening at any given moment. This is where I think it's a little bit misguided, but it's this idea of PMs being the mini CEOs, right? So if they're sort of running the show on a day-to-day basis, making sure that the machine is running in an early startup, that can be very effective as a mechanism for ensuring that founders are able to do the very strategic job that they need to do, and teams are able to get really good inputs so that they can create really great outputs.
I like the reframing of product management is a function, not a role. It can be a role, but at the end of the day, you're filling that gap. And it's almost as they are the context keepers, right? It's the watchman that kind of watches over the entire product and knows all the different pieces, the movement, the strategy, what's coming up next, et cetera, et cetera. You also touched on how businesses are needing to shift their priorities, how they operate, how they raise funds, how they spend funds in this new paradigm post zero interest rate environment. What does this new economy look like as it's shaping up for you and your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's still very much evolving, and I'd be very dishonest if I said I had a really great picture of it. But I what I am seeing is pressure to move spending almost entirely towards growth and away from things that are considered uh, a luxury. And I think that general mindset is a healthy one. We have, absolutely padded our org structures in the last few years in ways that, the bottom falling out was sort of almost bound to happen in that area. And while that has, real human costs, if we can get this right, we can actually create organizations that can support the right level of scale moving forward. So, from that initial pressure of everything has to be revenue generating, what I'm seeing is that teams are cutting out a lot of their middle management functions. They're saying that there is a strategic lead and then a lot of individual contributors, and sort of asking teams to figure it out. That comes with some very real risks. There's another truism that companies and their effectiveness are almost always measured by the capabilities of their middle management teams. So, when you're talking about Series B or companies at 100 people or more, you do need a layer of people managers, and without that, it can be a real struggle to grow and attract the right talent and so on and so forth. But that aside, it gives folks in the product domain an opportunity to grow and fill more space. And in so doing, giving up a bit of a disputed land, I would say, especially with design and engineering. As we start to move towards a world where product has to play a part both in the growth organization and in the development organization, which is sort of where I'm getting to with this line of thinking, you start to realize that it's truly the context that product owns. It's not the backlog per se. It's not the daily sprint stand-ups or the retros or anything like that, where I see a lot of product managers sort of, I don't want to say encroaching, but feel like there's a void that they must fill. It's instead asking our partners in engineering, like, hey, you want to take back this ground that was like very much sort of given as part of the agile process. Like let's keep that in engineering land. And on the design side, saying we need to live a little bit more in product and problem land. Can you own more of the solution space? So as a whole, where I'm seeing the biggest crunch is in Series A and Series B companies, with high valuations coming out of 2022, having a really hard time raising additional money, and time will tell if they're able to make it through this gauntlet. My gut tells me that we're going to see a mix of companies just closing up shop and companies reducing their operating budgets. And I think that comes with a healthy dose of fear and confusion for founders and VCs, which I can see folks are still trying to even just understand all the facts on the ground. So people are slowing down, not just with hiring, but with making risky decisions. And that reflective mindset that we're starting to see a little bit more in the industry, it leaves me quite optimistic, actually, that the future is going to be one where we're doing a little bit more examination of the activities and the spaces that we're exploring as an industry.
AI has obviously taken the world by storm in the past year and a half, and specifically large language models and ChatGPT and OpenAI. I've seen that is the sector that still has some of that bubble, rampant investment, fear of missing out, got to get your investment dollars in, got to build something there now. Do you think it's misguided and it's all FOMO? Not all FOMO. Do you think it's mainly FOMO of AI investment, or do you think a lot of really good products and companies are going to come out of this past tranche of startup investments?
So I'm probably going to upset some people with this. Two things. First of all, statistically, startups fail, just period. And when you see a very narrow investment thesis being applied across multiple, similar types of companies in the large language model space in particular, you can expect maybe 10% of them to succeed. So given the number of investments in that space, I think you're about to see some pretty intense attrition in terms of investments. So that's just sort of a reality of the market. And the second is, let's talk a little bit about where driverless cars are at the moment. 5 years ago, so hot. I need to credit a friend of mine who was using this exact line of thinking earlier. If he's listening to this, he'll know who he is. But everyone thought that we were going to have driverless cars by this point 5 years ago. Are there any driverless cars? No. In fact, we have lawsuits about those claims. But almost every car is able to park itself, every new car. So that technology went somewhere, but it was never going to be as successful or as quick as anybody thought it was. So, when we look at this conversation around AI, is this truly, generalized AI model? that we're seeing, sort of being created right now? I think the answer has to be no. But are we moving towards a world where I can ask Google to, find every conversation I've had with Elijah and tell me exactly which ones were on video? And can you tell me all the times that we mentioned AI? Like that type of thing, that virtual assistance, that ability to come up with novel answers to difficult questions for humans, that's a done deal. But to me, those are all interesting, but not critical.
Do you see
Uh,
these as new features for existing products, or do you think it's a fundamental new modality of interaction with technology?
I think I see it as features to existing products, with some important exceptions, but not nearly as many as I think the industry sees. And I'm trying to decide in my own head, or have been over the last few months, whether that's my natural cynicism as a product person. Most things shouldn't be built, or if there's something, about history repeating itself, where we really just need to be cautious about how much stock we put in, sometimes literally, to these emerging technologies.
What's a technology or space that excites you currently?
Um, this is going to seem like a left turn, but I'm really excited about the application of CRISPR technology in the reduction of plastic waste. I
Great answer.
Thank you. I think that it's one of the most fascinating applications of raw sort of applied science that we're going to see over the next 10 years. The number of things we're able to do with applied materials in particular is just huge. But, the thing that really sort of makes me most depressed about, the climate crisis or the environmental crisis we see as it unfolds is just how much our recycling system has just totally failed. And so just thinking about all the plastic that was promised to be recycled over time, and seeing some of the enzymatic models that can be used to solve those things, I just see a huge opportunity, for somebody to solve that. And they are, like using this CRISPR
Maybe
genomic
talk a little bit more
technology.
about that. So, how
Sure.
CRISPR is, what CRISPR is, how it's being applied to this particular world of plastics and recyclables, but just even broadly, I mean, the applications of CRISPR are
Yeah.
mind-boggling, and it's not really talked about much in the world of technology.
That's right. And, we're New York based. So, if we were in Boston, it would be a bit more, right? But, so CRISPR is this amazing technology that was created through research in, I think it was bacterial research, and realizing that there's actually a natural mechanism that allows bacteria to rewrite their own genome. Scientists have figured out how to, use this enzyme and this pathway to create sort of arbitrarily different gene patterns or DNA patterns within existing genomes. So you can imagine a system where you have a model organism that, say, uh, you know, creates ethanol, like, say, brewing yeast or something like that. Uh, if you were able to put another protein in the same sequence that makes ethanol, then when you give it sugar, it's going to create ethanol and whatever that other thing is. So suddenly we have the ability to reprogram cells based on existing inputs and existing cycles. The applications for medicine in humans are obviously just astronomical. It will be a bigger revolution for medicine than antibiotics was, because everything boils down to DNA at some point. With a big asterisk there for any of my, uh, microbiology friends who are listening. But the way in which it can be used in plastic reduction, there's actually a set of fungi that break down plastic naturally. Oyster mushrooms you can actually grow on, I think it's PET That might be wrong. It's one of the different types of plastic, but they do it slowly, and they don't really love to do it at the scale that humans create it. But what if we were able to insert that gene, isolate it, insert it in something that is able to create that enzyme in larger amounts? Suddenly, your brain starts to explode about all the different possibilities here. Cleaning up oil spills, creating fertilizer in a way that doesn't leak all sorts of nitrates into the Gulf of Mexico. Like there's just so many different ways to change the sort of quote unquote dirty way of doing things into a much more controllable lab grown system. And it could be a little scary. Like, if you've seen The Last of Us, sometimes, uh, bioengineering fungi goes wrong, but, the word on the street is that most of these, transgenic organisms are incredibly fragile and die as soon as you take them outside of the lab. So don't worry too much.
So we don't have to worry about mutants coming in the near future to eat us all.
Not from that, and that's, you can quote me.
Good. In terms of the future, you kind of talked a bit about how you have the product pessimistic view of, maybe pragmatic is the word, but we don't necessarily need that. Prove to me that we need that. On this other side, sounds like a little bit of an optimistic worldview of we're solving amazing problems, leveraging amazing technologies, using CRISPR, et cetera. How much does worldview show up in how you apply yourself to work, to product management, and to just everyday life?
I think for me, it's an integral part of why I do what I do, and how I do it. I'm lucky enough to have a father who was also an entrepreneur, and specifically a management consultant, and he did this from this perspective as both an engineer and as a psychologist. He spent a lot of time in school, and it really paid off for me at the very least. So, as I was brought up and I heard sort of the calls that he was on, and I saw the way that he thought about his own business, I realized that I very much resonate with this servant leadership way of thinking. And what that really means to me is that my job as a leader is to ensure that the people that work for me are better at what they do than I am. And it's my job to coach them in that direction. It's my job to take out the trash if that's what needs to be done. Because they are the experts. I'm just really good at getting those people together and sort of helping them understand where they all sit. Where that really has gone for me in my own work has been towards this idea of autonomous and self, not and empowered teams, not self-empowered, but empowered teams from the Marty Kagan, sort of school of thought. And I bring that to work every day. It's really sort of what I strive for, and I almost, I think at one point I would say I completely blindly went down that path of, leaders get out of the way, like let's get the bureaucracy out of the way, let's, all of that. And I now sort of recognize there's an umbrella portion of the organization that has to be there, but the majority of teams and the majority of people, if they are able to get from ideation all the way to realizing results within their own team, are going to be better off for it. So, I think that's a big part of my own sort of outlook on life as well. If you give people the tools to make their their neighborhood or their lives or their home a better place, and you give them a reason to do it, they will. But the more that you just sort of tell people what to do, the less flexibility you get in the results that, on the other end.
I could talk about this stuff all day long. I think it's deeply fascinating to understand human psychology, but to what you're describing is how do you empower. I think empower truly is the right word. Empower others to be their own change agents within a system, within an organization, within a company. If you don't have a leader that is of the same mindset as you, or kind of what we're describing, maybe let's close out with how can you start finding or creating that environment of self-fulfilling growth, being able to go from idea to execution, creating that freedom, even if your organization where you are currently doesn't have that environment and that construct.
Yeah, I love that. And change management and transformation is a passion of mine as well. I've had some success and some failures in that area. I think the first thing to do, if I'm speaking to that person who's sort of going through that challenge, um, the first piece of advice I'd say is really take stock of um, how much of what you're expecting from your leaders can be things that you can find on your own versus deficiencies, things that you truly need from your business. There is a tendency, because we spend as much time as we do with our businesses and our companies, to assume that they're going to provide everything we need, um, and they just shouldn't. We should have more, potentially a healthier conversation about that balance with our leaders. I think definitely we should, but beyond that, there are things that we should be responsible for sort of sourcing on our own as well. That aside, um, you need to find champions within your organization. You need to find the folks who are aligned with the need for change, and specifically, folks who can be loudspeakers or megaphones. That's the word I'm looking for. For the type of process or the type of thinking that a broader team might need in order to sort of find that empowered space. And what I do see are companies that have empowered teams carved out of potentially less fulfilling company cultures, and those teams, some folks may look at it and be like, I don't understand how they get anything done, it's like chaos, blah blah blah. And then other folks look at it and say, this is amazing, like I totally understand, this is how it should be done. But the only reason that's allowed to exist is because, number one, some people decided it should and they went and did it, and number two, the organization, while it may not be fully aligned, did not shut it down. And so there is this, we talk about NPS scores, right? And you have this promoter category of 8, 9, 10. But that middle category of folks who are like, we're okay with this product. If you have a company that's in that, 4 to 7 range, you can usually carve out your space and have that work quite nicely. And that's about, forming coalitions and maybe, setting up an innovation council within your domain area and, get some sponsorship, find those champions, and really figure out how you make that change. But it's also really important to recognize when that's not possible because of leaders who are in that 0, 1, 2, 3 section of the NPS range. Detractors are going to just take the pie and throw it right in your face. They may not know why, and it may not be their fault. It actually doesn't matter. But if you are at an organization where you want to make a change, and there are people who simply don't want to see that happen and will act on it, it's better off to think about what your other options are. Live with it or find somewhere else.
Take stock of the political climate that exists, and then either know that you can affect change in the company, and sometimes you have to change the company and leave.
That's
also
right.
a viable path.
Yes.
Sam, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show. I'm sure we could go on for hours and hours. If people want to connect with you or find out more about you, where should they go?
Yeah. So right now, as I mentioned, I'm doing this product strategy studio at Honest. That's honestprod, prod.com. You can find us there, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Sam Gimbel and I'll show up. It's the easiest way.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me.